Hello, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Nikhil, for organizing this. I know it took a lot of work. Again, my name is Zahabiya, and I'm going to be talking about domestic violence and restorative justice. So this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Are you listening to understand, or are you waiting to speak? I feel like in our society today, all we do is think about what we want to say instead of fully suspending our beliefs and trying to understand what the other person is saying. Keep that in mind as I start talking. So for domestic violence, here are some statistics. Every time I look at this, my heart sinks a little bit. So 1 in 4 women are victims of domestic violence. 3 women are murdered by their partners every single day. There's 1.3 million who are sexually assaulted or raped in 1 year, and 3 million children witness domestic violence in their homes. It becomes normal for them. They see their abuse in their parents. So my personal experience with this is that I was a volunteer with the Legal Aid Society of San Diego. I helped write restraining orders for victims of domestic violence. It's a very complicated legal process, so they needed help, sitting down, us to listen to their story and write these restraining orders for them. It was often the first time they would really be voicing the trauma that they endured, and they never really fully realized what they had happened to them. And I felt kind of unsettled because I would write these restraining orders for them, but I wasn't really there for them emotionally or psychologically. So here's a picture of one of my friends. We worked together. I was inspired by this experience, so I hosted the first annual benefit dinner right here at UC San Diego to really raise awareness about this issue. I realized that it's just not about the physical violence. There's the psychological toll, the emotional toll, even the financial burden that happens on the victim that holds them in that relationship. And I wanted to bring this conversation to our college campus because I know there's so many students who are in toxic relationships and they just don't know about it. This year, I'm an RA at the Village, and last quarter, there were some incidents of racial discrimination. People were yelling racial slurs in the hallways, and there was even a time when someone drew some swastikas on my building. I reported the incidents to my supervisor. I did the incident reports, but I still felt really unsettled. I mean, I live there too. A lot of my residents still felt unsafe, and I knew we had to do something more. So I got a group of RAs, and we started to host social justice town halls every week to really bring the community together and discuss controversial topics. I wanted to open this up to everyone. It was really scary, I'm not gonna lie, because I'm obviously not an expert on social justice. I don't really do this often. I didn't feel qualified, and I also didn't know who was going to show up, what they were going to say. So a few days before the first town hall, I approached one of my professors, Dr. Karen Dobkins. I went to her and I asked, I'm holding these social justice town halls, do you have any advice for me? And what she said, I'll never forget. She said, Zahabiya, make sure to listen to the other side. Make sure to address that dark side within us and not to alienate anyone. To really get to the root of the problem, we have to look at the offender, the victim, the community, all together as one unit. She asked, have you ever heard of restorative justice? I said, maybe, I think so. I knew it was some sort of term out there, but I didn't really fully realize that this term is what I've been searching for all these years. It encompasses all the work that I'm trying to do. So, what is restorative justice? So I did some research, and it's a victim-centered response to crime. So it's basically an active involvement of all the parties, the victim, the offender, and the community, all coming together as a unit to really address the harm that has been caused and how we can move forward from this. And those affected are involved, and that's the most important part. So there's 2 different views right now. So the one that our society is so familiar with is the retributive justice, the traditional justice system. So that basically states that the crime is a violation of the law and the state, and that it creates guilt. And then it requires the state to determine the blame and guilt, and basically the offenders are the bad guys. They get what they deserve, they have to be put in jail, and so forth. But restorative justice, on the other hand, is a violation of personal relationships of people. It creates obligations for the offender. They can't just sit behind bars. They actually have to address the harm that they caused. And it involves the victims, offenders, communities to have the responsibility to right these wrongs. And so the main goals are to put the key decisions into the hands of those most affected, to reduce the likelihood of future offenses. Because I'm sure you all are aware of, like, once you are convicted of a crime, it's so easy to get caught into that system, to keep committing those crimes, because it's a vicious cycle. And the victims are involved in this process, and this is huge, because the traditional justice system, yes, it is for the victim, but how often do they really get to voice all the trauma and the hurt that they have, all the nights that they can't sleep, the psychological effect it has on them? And so then the offenders fully understand how the actions have impacted their victims and the community. So this past weekend, I was really interested, obviously, in restorative justice. So I reached out to a local nonprofit organization called the Restorative Justice Mediation Program. I wanted to get involved, and they have this victim-offender dialogue. So I trained to be a facilitator for 20 hours this weekend. It was amazing. And here's what I learned. So through their process, they primarily deal with juveniles. So when they get convicted of a crime, either the prosecutor or the defendant, they can promote this program, this restorative justice, like victim-offender dialogue. And if the offender agrees and the victim agrees, this is important, both of them have to agree, they can go through this program and they can decide on another way instead of to go to the juvenile detention center or to pay that fine. So what happens is we initially contact the offender. We ask them, are you willing to take responsibility for what happened? Are you willing to face the victim face to face? We contact the victim. We ask, are you ready to see the offender? Do you want to do this? You know, we don't want to inflict more trauma than is already there. Once they both agree to the process, I, as a facilitator, first meet with the offender. I sit them down and I ask them what happened. Because often it's way more than just that one crime. Maybe they have an addiction. Maybe there's abuse at home. Maybe that 13-year-old just doesn't have a mother who's around that often and they had to steal for food. You just never know. And then we meet with the victim and fully address the harm that they have had in their life. And we let them talk. We let it all out in the open because they're frustrated. They just want someone from the system to listen to them. And so we do that. And then we come together in a dialogue. So the victim is there, the offender is there, I as a facilitator, their support persons, because sometimes they're kids, you know, they have their parents. And then we do the follow-up. And during that dialogue, it is important that both parties share their experiences, but then we come together and come up with some sort of resolution in which we can move forward. Maybe the kid has to do some community service hours. Maybe they have to repair the bike that they stole from the victim. So I'd like to share a story of how this model works. There's two teenagers, and they were friends, and someone gave them a car to use for the day. They didn't question it. They went out to the beach. They were having a grand old time. And then they were arrested. There was cop cars everywhere. They didn't even know what for. Apparently, they had a stolen car with them. And so they had all these charges against them. But they were offered this program. Both parties agreed. And when the victim saw that it wasn't two big, scary men that had stolen his car and broken the headlights, but it was two young teenagers with a full life ahead of them who had been convicted of this crime, his heart softened a little bit. They were able to talk it out. And even though the two teenagers didn't intend to steal the car, they didn't even know about it, they still took some responsibility. They said, I'm really sorry we didn't find out more about where this car came from. We didn't question it. I'm really sorry. And the victim, he, instead of pushing forward with all the charges, he was like, it's okay, just give me the money to fix the headlights, and they moved on. And now the teenagers are off to college instead of being caught into the system for something they didn't even intend to do. So that's the power that this victim-offender dialogue can have. And it's already being used with juveniles here in California and some other crimes. And so after this, I talked to my professor, Dr. Karen Dopkins, again, and we got to talking. And I told her about my experience with domestic violence, and we were thinking about what about combining the approach to maybe create a way in which we could foster even more healing. And so we can maybe have the victims can voice the pain and trauma they endured, and offenders can take the responsibility, and we can reach a better resolution. And so we are going to try to get some domestic violence cases and implement that this summer with the mediation program that I just described. But there are some potential drawbacks. Last night with my social justice town hall, we were discussing this. It was a really great conversation. We came up with a lot of things that could go wrong. There's the emotional trauma. You could fall back into the toxic relationship. It could simply be unsafe. And as someone said, each relationship is different. You know, you can't have like a mold for every single thing because the dynamics are so different. And yet, this restorative justice approach could somehow still be used to address this major issue. So we talked about surrogate victims. So there's a re-entry prep program in jails where if there's like offenders affiliated with gangs, sometimes it's just not safe to have the victim of that specific crime in that room, right? So they have a surrogate victim who has gone through something similar, but not that specific crime, come and talk about how this has affected them. And so the offender can see it from a fresh new perspective about how this has impacted another human being. So this could be something we could do with domestic violence so that people don't fall into that same pattern like, oh, I know I hit you, but it's because you did this and this and this, but it's just someone completely different. So it could be a potential thing we could do. Also, there could be more education in high schools. Because if we start early and address these toxic relationships and show people that it's not okay to be constantly addicted to someone instead of love someone, to show them that feeling like you're walking on eggshells is just not okay and you shouldn't feel that in a relationship. Hopefully by giving people the resources and the knowledge early on, they can grow to become better people in the future and we can have a society that doesn't result to domestic violence. And we can even practice this restorative justice in relationships in high schools when maybe it hasn't escalated to such an extreme point as it does in adults. And in the end, I just want to emphasize that we are all humans and that communication is so crucial. And we have to share our perspectives and learn from each other. Because if we don't, and if we're just waiting for ourselves to speak, how will we ever move forward and how will we ever learn? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. I know there's a lot of different moving parts, but it is something I'm very passionate about, and I know if we all come together, we can do something really great. So thank you. Here's my email.